Okay. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're calling in. I'm just going to wait for a few folks to get their audio connections all aligned. Happy Tuesday, wherever you are. Mm. All right, let me just jump in and get started. So, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Ramian Pierre. I'm the Chief Learning Officer for Break the Norm Leadership. You can see my colleague, the amazing, fantastic Rachel Sadoff, who is our CEO and founder. Hey, Rachel. Today, we are talking about high performing teams. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I want to point out a couple of things before we get started, but I'm going to jump right in so that we can make the most of this 30 minutes for all of you. The first thing I'll say is, hi, Allison. I am a pro camera on, pro take yourself off mute, sort of interactive facilitator. If you feel comfortable doing that, absolutely no pressure and no need to justify cameras off. So I wanted to say that first. Number two, if you like anything that you hear today, Break the Norm Leadership makes house calls. We are happy to work with your company. We're happy to work with you or your team to help them become higher performers. Please contact Rachel at breakthenormleadership.com and we will start the conversation and get you all set. Number three, there's an exciting, vibrant, carefully researched and put together handout for today, which is available on the Break the Norm Leadership website. If you go to www.breakthenormleadership.com did I get that right, Rachel? /LNL. You're going to see all of our lunch and learns. And if you go to the one for today, there'll be a little like down arrow for downloading. Just click on that and you'll download the handout for today. I'll be speaking about it in a few minutes just to give a high level overview, but I won't be covering the entire document. There's more than enough resources there to fill like more than half an hour. So those three things. You feel free to turn your cameras on. Feel free to have a conversation with me if you want. Please, if you want us to make house calls, let us know. We're happy to do that to help you and your team. And three, please download the handout. All right. So today's topic is developing and leading high performing teams. And I've taught a lot about this with graduate students. And there are two mistakes I see happen over and over and over again when it comes to either developing high performing teams or once you get one, leading high performing teams. And I want to get those out right now because if you can fix these two things, or if you can even just admit that these two things are a problem, then you'll be ahead of most organizations, leaders, in terms of developing a high performing team. The two mistakes I see most often is one, leaders or organizations assume that grown adults are ready to be on teams, and that is often not the case. So number one, the assuming that grown adults are ready to be on teams. Number two is the work, the leader or organization wants it to be to be teamwork, but the work is really group work. It's not teamwork. All right, so let me talk about each one of those in turn. Grown adults not being ready to be on a high performing team may sound really hard. It may be really hard for people to hear. In my experience teaching, it is hard for people to hear. But here's what I tell them. I say, hey, how many teams have you been on? They will say hundreds, thousands, like ever since I started school, like teams, 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 in my social life, in my academic life, in my work life. I say, great. Then I ask them, how many of those teams seem to work well? And they will say almost none. I was the person who had to do all the work, had to make up for somebody else who disappeared. Like they 95% of those teams were a complete nightmare, and 2% were like beyond nightmare. We're a slow moving train wreck into a dumpster fire that fell off a cliff and got hit by a plane bad, like that bad. And I said, all right, fair. And then I tell them, so have you learned how to be a good team member from all of those bad experiences? And when they think about it, they say, no, I know what not to do, but I don't necessarily know what to do. And that's where I like to start with people. One of my favorite books is Stephen Covey's Habits of Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. But the part I really, really love is the first, I don't even know if it's the first chapter, it might be the preface. He packs so much great information before he gets into the seven habits. And one of the things I really appreciate is he has sort of his like wheel graphic. If I thought about it, I would have pulled up a slide about it. But in that wheel graphic where he lays out how all the seven habits fit together, there are three different levels. There's dependent level, independent level, and interdependent level. And the way I understood what he was saying is, adults, we want to feel like the pinnacle of our evolution is that we are independent adults. Men, we get this message all this time in this country that, you got to be independent, you got to be grown, not only grown, fully grown, maybe even overgrown. But what I loved about Stephen Covey is he doesn't make being independent the pinnacle of being a highly effective person. It's just the way station. Like you need to get from being dependent to independent, but the goal is to become interdependent. My argument is that most adult workers in this country can be independent. They have that level of skill, most of them, not all. But relatively few have ever been taught how to be interdependent. Think about this in your personal life, and then it'll make sense in your professional life. How many grown adults do you know that are able to have, oh, you're awesome, Rachel. Yes. So you can see dependence at the bottom. That's where we all start. Independence in the middle. Interdependence is where we're going. Think about this, looking at this chart. How many adults do you know, grown folks, who know how to manage conflict, who know how to express their intentions or their boundaries, who know how to have difficult conversations or communicate hard things, who know how to or know when to put others' needs in front of their own needs, or vice versa, know when it's time for them to take the lead as opposed to follow. Those are high level interdependent skills that many adults just don't have a whole lot of practice in part because they haven't had the time or taken the time to reflect upon all the bad team experiences that they've had. So I'll actually encourage you to go back to a previous training that we did, I think it was in January, on emotionally intelligent leadership. And that talked about a number of the skills adults need on an individual basis in order to be ready to be on a high performing team. So that's number one. Like have a conversation with the people who you want to be on this high performing team about how they may not be ready and what kind of skills do they need? What kind of communication, conflict resolution, or just do they even know what their strengths are, types of skills that they need in order to be on a high performing team? So that's number one. It'll be a frank conversation. It might be a bit uncomfortable. All right, Rachel, you can take down that slide. The mistake number two that I see time and time again with folks who want to have their teams be high performing is that they assume that they want a team, but the work is not structured for a team. So the true definition of a team is that I can't succeed unless we all succeed, where my work is dependent upon other people that are part of this group. I've been working 30 some years as a grown person, and almost all of my jobs, I've been basically an independent contractor. Like if people disappeared from around me, I could still do my job. It would be slower. I'd probably make more mistakes. It would be harder, but it's definitely possible. That isn't teamwork. That's just group work or side by side work. And that is the way that most teams are designed. I'll say often sports, and I say often, sports teams can be an exception, right? And I'm stepping out of my area of excellence into an area of barely competent and talking about sports. So bear with me. Here we go, sports ball talk. I do have a little bit of experience with volleyball, and I know in volleyball there are three basic moves. There's passing the ball, setting the ball, spiking the ball, and any player can do those three things with some minor exceptions, right? And so with a volleyball team, if there are six people, if we're playing indoor and there are six people, we can play, regulation volleyball. But if we only have three, we can still do it because we can just each take on slightly different or modified roles. I, in the work that happens all the time in the workplace, and that isn't real teamwork because I feel like, and this is another sports area that I know less about is football. It seems like on football there are people who do specific things at the same time that other people are doing very specific things. That seems like more of a team, a true team where this person can't do their job unless this person is over here doing this job, which is often keeping somebody on their team from running into this person. So like that is true teamwork. That doesn't have to exist in volleyball, which is one of the reasons why I liked it, because in volleyball, it's a team sport where you never ever have to touch the other team. Oh, my dream. All right. So the point being, most teamwork and organizations is not really teamwork. It's just a bunch of people working in close proximity, related work, but many of your people could do their jobs without the other people around them. So don't try and force teamwork or force this team to be high performing or or highly integrated if the work itself doesn't require that. Um, Incidentally enough, whenever I hear organizations or leaders talk about we want to break down silos at this organization, it's the same issue, is that silos will break down when there are superordinate goals that can't be met by individual departments, you know? So unless you're doing a project that involves all the departments involved, you're going to have silos. And that's not necessarily bad, but I just want to make the point is you can't get this high level activity, broken down silos or high performing teams unless the work actually requires it. Don't try and fit every square peg into a round hole. Do those two mistakes make sense? That mistake number one is grown adults are not ready to be on high performing teams because they don't have the interdependent skills that they need. And number two is we're often asking adults to do teamwork when it's not really teamwork, when it's just like group work. All right, I appreciate the head nods. All right, that said, let me spend some time getting into what are the techniques, strategies, and tactics for building and leading high performing teams. Again, I'm going to drop into the chat because we've had a few more people come in. This link will take you to the Break the Norm Leadership Lunch and Learn webpage. If you go to today's session, there'll be a downward pointing arrow. Click on that arrow and you can download this handout that I'm about to walk you through. I won't walk walking through the whole handout, actually. I'll just be focusing really on the first page of it. 1 second. Here we go. So what we have here, let me take you to the top, are developing and leading high-performing teams. Here we talk about what the definitions of a team is. I just sort of talked through that for a few moments, but there are 7 drivers for high-performing team effectiveness. And I want to go through these and just talk you through them because I think this will make this will get most of you, 50%, 80% of the way there, because you can fill in the blanks, but this handout has more information. So number one, capability. You want to make sure and ask yourself, do the people who I want to be on this high performing team, do they have the skills, knowledge, and attributes that I need them to in order to be high performers? Do they have what Stephen Covey would call interdependent skills? Do they have emotional intelligence? Are they able to have awareness of their own emotional states and regulate them? And are they able to have awareness of others' emotional states and productively regulate interactions with other people? If they're not emotionally intelligent, then they may not be ready to be in a high performing team. So get them ready. But first, you have to get them to admit that they have a problem. I'll take that back. Cancel. Not a problem, but they have a challenge because adults like challenges. So after capability, after you're sure that these folks are ready to be on a high performing team, you want to see do they have the beliefs and attitudes to cooperate? Now, often what I will tell folks who are starting a team or inheriting a team is lead with this part, lead with cooperation. On your first day, on day one, set the tone for how you want people to work together. What beliefs do you want them to have about the team? Maybe the team isn't high performing right now, admit that, but say, here's where we want to go and give them a reasonable time frame. Don't do one of those, in the next 3 weeks because you think that habits are formed in 21 days when the research actually shows habits take 18 to 267 days, with the average being 66 days. So say something like by next quarter, here's where I want us to be, but here's the goal for this team to have for each of you to believe these things about teams and for each of you to show these types of attitudes in your work with your colleagues. Start with cooperation. And while you're going through that 3-month process of getting the team to really believe what you need them to believe, explained further down in this handout, you can assess them either informally and or formally on capability. You can find out, okay, I have been talking about the belief, I've been selling the belief, but let me check and see, do they have the skills? Are they developing the skills? How can I get individual people ready to be high performing team players? Then it becomes a matter of coordination. And that is, you want to see, all right, if people believe the right thing, are they actually doing actions that support those beliefs? Because there's often a gap between what people believe, like knowing the right, what did Maya Angelou say? Um, once you know better, do better. But there's still sometimes people need help, whether it's support or monitoring or reinforcement to get from, yeah, I know better, now I will do better. So it's actually helpful to tell your teammates or team members or the people you're leading, here are the behaviors I'm looking for that will show me that you have the beliefs, attitudes, and skills to be on the team. I'm looking for people who will do this. And you want to list out observable behaviors. For example, I'm looking for people who will send out meeting agendas ahead of time. I'm looking for people who, when they're in conflict with somebody else, will say, I disagree with, or I see things differently. Tell me more about what you see. Like, really be specific about what words you want people to use and what actions you want to see people do. If I can't, if I'm following you around with a clipboard and I can't hear it, I can't see it, then you're not doing it. Like really lean in on those types of data. Once you're sure that there's coordination, that people are practicing the effective behaviors, then you want to get to the communication level. You want to make sure that the team is communicating effectively with each other. And that's just not delivering information, but it's also receiving information. You want to make sure that they close the loop. And there's that saying, and I can't remember who it was attributed to, that the greatest problem with communication is the belief that it happened when it actually hasn't happened. That's me paraphrasing. So closing the loop. I will say something to Rachel. Rachel will tell me back what she thought I said. I will say yes, and then we can keep going forward and forward. It does slow down conversation to a level that can be very painful for type A folks. Um, Feel that pain and do it anyway for 18 to 267 days, right? Get in the habit of making sure that team members close the loop on communication and know that they're actually receiving the message in the way that it was heard. Yes, it's active listening, but and I'll say yes, and it's even more than that. It's active listening plus empathetic listening, like trying to read between the lines. This is where emotional intelligence comes in. I don't know if any of you are married, but I know that there are times when I'll say, no, that's fine, when clearly it is not fine. So like learn to interpret tone too, right? So capability, cooperation, coordination, communication, and now cognition. So this is really about making sure that we all think about the same things in the same ways. And where I often see this being an issue is when leaders say, I have a team member who just doesn't practice good judgment. When I hear that, I'm thinking, that's a team that is said to have an accurately, not accurately is not the right word, where they don't have a shared cognition of how to handle certain things, about when, like what is a priority over other activities. So, for example, I was on a team once where we were at a member-based organization, and so any information or inquiries or communications from members immediately jumped to the top of the must-do of our to-do list, right? We either had to respond quickly, and close the circle, close the issue, or just respond quickly and say, I'm working on your issue. That was a shared cognition that we all had. We all knew that in this case, all the other priorities are gone, and this priority is the most important. For example, in project management, what is that? The schedule, cost. Oh, Rachel, help me. What's the third thing in project management that you always have to control? Schedule, cost, and expense. Sorry. And at any one point, one of those is always the most important, but it can vary from time to time on every project. You want to make sure your team knows for this quarter, for this month, for this week, this day, price is the most important, cost is the most important. We need to manage the cost, or schedule is the most important. We need to measure the schedule. So just be clear, not be clear. Help your team understand what are the priorities, and the way you do that is by making sure that they have the same cognition, the same understanding about the vision, about their roles, swim lanes, as well as priorities. Then comes to the actual leading of teams. And in this case, because we're trying to keep all these drivers starting with the letter C for alliterative purposes, we're calling that coaching. So do the leader and team members demonstrate the necessary leadership behaviors? So there's an assumption built into this question that you might have caught that the leader is not the only person who is exhibiting, sorry, the quote unquote leader is not the only person who's exhibiting leadership behaviors. One of the things we believe at Break the Norm Leadership is that every leadership is everywhere. Everyone can be a leader. And when it comes to high performing teams, everyone needs to be a leader. Here's an example. I led a team at an organization, and one of the things I noticed is that when I was in the room, whether the room was a physical room or a virtual meeting room, people looked to me to hold other people on the team accountable. And while that's fine and part of my job, what I really needed and tried and communicated to the team was when I'm not here, I need you to hold each other accountable. And even when I am here, it fills my heart with butterflies, rainbows, puppies, all good things to see you hold each other accountable because it's all of our jobs. Patrick Lencioni's Overcoming the Five Dysfunctions of Team, that is one of the points that he makes in that book as well, is that you want accountability for your team. It's after you do all the four other overcome the other four dysfunctions. It's the last dysfunction to overcome. But you don't want the team leader being the only person holding people accountable. It's very either paternalistic or maternalistic in terms of like it feels like, oh, mom's or dad is in the room, I have to behave, but the second mom or dad is out of the room, I can do what I want, party time. You want team members to hold each other accountable. So making sure that appropriate leadership behaviors are being exhibited by all members of the team. And then last are conditions. So this had to relate to the second of the two mistakes I see happen most often with high performing teams, that it's not really teamwork, or it's essentially the context doesn't really support teamwork. So the question here is the context in which the team operates favorable for performing effectively? And in my experience, having worked in a number of not-for-profits, often it has to do with resources. Do we have the resources to do what we need to do? But I've also seen in many organizations with tons of resources in terms of people or money or equipment, like, do we have a culture that supports teamwork? Some examples. Is your incentive system based on individual performance or team performance? Um, that is one way in which an organization an organization will send the message, we don't really value teamwork. It's a nice to have, but we put money on individuals doing their work. So we talk about team, but we really, where the money meets the road, sorry, that's the wrong gesture, where the money meets the road is when you perform well as an individual. So just make sure that the context is set up for working teams, not working teams, for high performing teams. All right. That was a super fast overview of this handout. Actually, it's not really an overview. Let me keep going. I'll just show you what's here, though I won't speak to it directly. So that was the first page. And then what we do in this handout is we break down, here are more details about, for example, for capability, the types of skills that individuals need to be on high performing teams, as well as the personal attributes that they need to be on high performing teams. When we say cooperation, what are we talking about? We're talking about trust, psychological safety, collective collective efficacy, and cohesion. So we go through a little more information about all of the 7 C's. Yes, and that's the rest of this document. Again, you can download it from the Break the Norm Leadership website, where we have all of our Lunch and Learn handouts as well as recordings. I encourage you particularly to go back to the January Lunch and Learn about emotionally intelligent leadership. That goes more into the types of skills that you or your team members need to get from the dependent level to the independent level, and then from the independent level to the interdependent level. And as I said at the top, if there are any opportunities for us to make house calls and help you out with your work, we'd love to do it. Now, that said, I'd love to open it up for questions, comments, because I really want to try and be as helpful as I can for those of you who are gathered here. What kind of questions? Oh, and then what kind of questions do you have? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to amplify something that Rachel put in the chat. Is we keep the lunch and learns quick and fast so that you can get what you need, actually eat some real food. Major props to folks who eat while they're listening because I do that all the time. I feel like if you send me a lunchtime meeting, you deserve to see all the machinations. So get into it. Um, but we keep them to half an hour. We will make them an hour if they're sponsored at a very, very reasonable rate. So low that I won't even bother to mention it here on the meeting. But just give Rachel at breakthenormleadership.com. Wait, what's the email address, Rachel?
That's it, Rachel@breakthenormleadership.com.
Yes, if you send her a quick email, she will get you set up and we can turn these into 60-minute sessions. We will give you props. We can even talk with you to interact with you, and we will answer questions from your invitees. If we can't get to them all online, we'll answer them afterwards. All right. So that said, I would love to know what questions folks have about how to build or lead high-performing teams.
I really love, Ramian, that towards the end you mentioned about um, what are kind of the measurables of team success? Is it an individual or is it results oriented? Because it really
Yeah.
thinks makes me think about like Lencioni and his 5 practices of dysfunctional teams, and how like results is the end, and that people will build trust and they will do conflict and they will do all of these things. But as soon as they feel like we might miss the margin, then it's everyone for themselves. It's no longer.
Yes, right? Yeah. And I cannot overestimate. I cannot say enough about how powerful of a motivator that is for folks. I won't give you my private TED talk about the impact of capitalism on the mindset of the typical American knowledge worker, but no, you can fill in the gaps. Deborah, do you have a question? I see your hand.
Yes, I did have a question. I really liked your point about coaching, where you were sharing that everyone on the team should be a coach. And I'm wondering, in a team structure where maybe the leader, the traditional leader of the team, might not have that same like coaching mindset, what are strategies that you might encourage and empower other team members to use in order to facilitate a team becoming, having more opportunities for coaching?
Yeah. All right. I'm so glad you asked that question. All right. This is off the top of my head, but I think this is going to be helpful. My experience is that often team members don't coach or are reluctant to coach because they feel that they can't be the perfect coach. Let me say this, there's no such thing. And what most people on the other end of that interaction really need is they need some help. They don't necessarily need perfect help. In fact, I think you'll find that most of us hate perfect help. We like if you help me, I'll use who my kids, Tiffany. If Tiffany, who looks like so incredibly smart and is probably incredibly good at her job, if she gave me perfect advice every time, part of me would secretly loathe her. So, because we all kind of like, we don't like that girl, that boy, that man, that woman that is like perfect all the time. Quick aside, one of my favorite books about writing and about life is Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. And in chapter 2, which I think is called Shitty First Drafts, excuse my language, she talks about how every writer makes shitty first drafts. But she said there was one writer she knows who makes perfect drafts. She didn't name the writer, but she said everyone hates that writer because she's perfect every time. All right. That said, I use coaching, that actual word, COACH, um, as an acronym to help people who are not used to coaching. Book title again is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. All right. So the coach acronym. I'm gonna try and type this as I say it. So first question you ask people is the C. What's the current situation? Like what is going on? It's like Olivia Pope during Scandal when she always asks people, "What do you want?" No one, you can't give people help unless you know what it is they want. Do they want the problem to go away? Do they want to solve the problem? Do they want you to take the problem for them? Like, find out what do they want? What's going on here? And then you go to the O, you work with them to have them help start developing options. All right, this is your problem. This is what you want. What are the possibilities here? What things are on the table? help them at least analyze, or not analyze, elicit, what's the word for, I'm losing my words, for when you say things. Have them list out. Tiffany's giving me good advice, but she's on mute. I'm just going to
I was
assume
gonna
that.
say, evoke.
Ooh, yes, I love evoke. Have them evoke. What are the options here? So you've generated some options. I forget what the A is, so let's skip. Oh no. Actually, I forget what the A is. Let me come back to that. And then the CH is actually, CH is for choice. Once they've laid out the options, ask them, all right, we know what your situation is, we know what you want, we know what the options are, and maybe you can suggest some other options they didn't see. What should you do? And then have them make a choice. You don't make the choice for them, have them make a choice. And I would say the next part is, maybe that's where the A should go, afterwards, is like find out what are the results of those actions? Like, so afterwards, what are the results? Because one of the things I learned from this brilliant project manager at NASA is when you make decisions, decision's not over after you've made it. The decision's over after you've made it, and you watch to see, is it producing the results you want? And then you either stick with that decision, or you make some adjustments to get the results that you want. So ask the person, what do you want? What is going on? What are the possible options? Which of those options do you think is most likely to get you what you want? And then let's watch and see what happens afterwards so that we can adjust or pivot. You may be able to ask them what types of things will indicate that the decision you made was a good decision. So that's like a simple coach model, although I know I got that A backwards. That's a simple coach model that's easy to teach a whole team so they can help each other and remind them perfect help is not desired here. We hate perfect help. We like imperfect help. Deborah, does that help at all? Awesome. Are there other questions? Oh, we're at time. So I try and keep my word, much to my chagrin. I get so excited. If you have other questions, if you send them to Rachel at breakthenormleadership.com, she will forward them to me and I will answer them. Also, while you're emailing her, ask her about how you or your organization, either professional or social, might sponsor one of our Lunch and Learns. Our next Lunch and Learn is on, training that's, January, February, March, training that sticks, right after tax day, training that sticks on April the 16th. Now, this one is sponsored by the Savannah, Georgia PMI. I'm very excited about that because my people come from Savannah, Savannah and Trinidad. So that one will be 60 exciting minutes of how do you design training that sticks. Hopefully you'll be able to come back and join me, but if not, you'll be able to get the recording from the Break the Norm Leadership website. All right. Thanks you all for joining. Thank you so much for turning your cameras on. It's helped to get, I have stranger danger, but it's helpful to see faces. So have a great first day of spring, and hopefully I'll see some of you next month.